nation. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. And we're here this morning in collaboration with a host of various organizations and people online as well as in person to speak about protections for the incarcerated populations during COVID. Now, we all know that there's a pandemic going on now that has devastated our communities. Well, think about the devastation that's happening in our prisons and jails. And unfortunately, this particular vulnerable population has been least spoken about and the least seen about. So we are here to bring light and information as well as hopefully we can get the help that this particular population needs when it comes to their protection and their treatment in this time of COVID. So along with myself, I also have my co-moderator and engineer of this experience will be Rebecca Engel of the Fortune Society, who will also be taking on moderator's duty along with myself. And so without further ado, I'd like to bring my co-moderator, Rebecca, to the mic, and she'd like to say a few words. So thank you once again for everybody. And here is Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out, for all of everybody who has logged in and everyone who is in the bitter cold throughout New York and Connecticut. We are incredibly grateful for you being here. And as Victor mentioned, there has been basically all of a sudden, this seems like a problem, even though this has been a problem for quite some time. The huge spread of COVID-19 throughout prisons, throughout New York, and actually through the federal prison system as well. And Governor Cuomo has responded to a lawsuit here in New York, and he has finally said that people can get the vaccine in New York prisons, but that's not enough. Much more needs to be done at this time, and we're gonna hear people talk about all of the different conditions that that incarcerated people are currently living under, and then we're gonna have a list of demands that Victor and I are gonna present, and that we're going to ask for you to call your representatives and make this a bigger deal than it's even getting right now. And there is one prison where I want to, because this is where we're going to start the rally today, which is a Danbury Federal Prison. This is in Connecticut. All the way back in last April, it was actually our then Attorney General Barr who said that Danbury was in a horrific state and that there had to be, it was basically an emergency. And more than a month later, in addition to many other dangerous conditions behind its wall, of the nearly 1,000 incarcerated people who were at Danbury, only 21 people had actually been sent home for home confinement. So that brought a lawsuit that then got a judge talking about it, and judge starting to say that Danbury needed to clearly focus on the critical issues of the word inmate that was used and public safety than the current process does. And so we want to then start our rally today by starting, hopefully, if tech issues are resolved, starting in Danbury, Connecticut, which is where we see even our federal government has greatly failed our incarcerated population. So hopefully we're going to switch over to Danbury. Let's see if that's possible. And I wanted to introduce actually our speaker there, a formerly incarcerated woman at Danbury, whose name is Tanya Pierce.
Good morning. Good morning. You can hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Good morning. First and foremost, happy Black History Month. We are here primarily in the month of February because of the many Black and brown lives that are affected by COVID, incarceration, and so more, and solitary confinement. We are here rallying at Danbury Federal Correctional Institute. We are demanding that BOP change the policy of solitary confinement for quarantining the women and men here, and release all the women in prison in the camp to home confinement in accordance with Judge Shea's April 20th, 2020 stipulation of settlement. and pursuant to the directive of the United States Attorney General. The women housed at the camp, a minimal security facility without any locks or fencing, are not a harm to society. If they were, they would be housed elsewhere. The mothers, sisters, and daughters' lives are being jeopardized each day that Danbury refuses to release them, as they should have, pursuant to the court order and directive from the United States Attorney General. The past 8 months has proven home detention works as an alternative to incarceration.
Did the audio go out?
For decades, the BOP has been allowed to run afoul. In 2016, Danbury went from 2 prisons to 3. They built a new women's facility, increasing the prison population at a time when the nation was demanding the end of mass incarceration. We are here to tell the world that the incarcerated lives matter too. And we are demanding that BOP, DOJ, and probation work in tandem with community organizations to provide reentry services. We know 100% of the women behind these walls will be released from the camp, but Danbury has been allowed for years not to provide adequate preparation or resources to the women in prisons, especially at the camp. Today, I stand here with the Fortune Society, A Little Piece of Light, HALTSolitary, and other supporting organizations that are boots on the ground in this fight, in solidarity with the sisters and brothers who are and have been incarcerated at Danbury. Change can only begin when we reimagine alternative to incarceration at Danbury. It is time to #raid BOP. As Martin Luther King wrote in his famous Birmingham letter, "Justice delayed is justice denied." Here is a snapshot of the conditions from a sister. The situation has gotten worse. Staff has completely abandoned us. They came in last night and said it was too dangerous for staff to be with us. So no staff will be placed inside with us. The CO said, "Yell at the window if you need something," and laugh. They left, refusing to do anything. They open the door, throw food in like we're animals. Cameras are everywhere, which is a prior violation. I can't express everything that is happening because it's surreal. They built the shower in a closet, which is 3 feet in the air. You have to climb in and out. No shower curtain, water is everywhere. No executive staff contact. We are literally alone, sick, scared, and afraid. We sleep on metal cots. We are black and blue from the cots. Medical comes in once a day to check us for our temperatures. No laundry access. I haven't eaten in 5 days. Giving me rice with onions and canned tomatoes dumped on top every meal. Rice is not a meal. We say today to DOJ, to BOP, it's time to raid alternative to incarceration at Danbury. Justice delayed is justice denied. 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 Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and everybody who is standing with her near to Danbury Prison today. And I want to continue to keep up the momentum. And the next person that we're going to speak to is virtual, and that is going to be Assemblywoman Souffrant Forrest.
Is she logged on? Did we get a confirmation she was logged on already?
No, that I don't know. Hopefully she made it.
You received the
Okay.
email, but
Well, well, hopefully she did. And if not, then we could move to the rabbi if you like, because if she's not in right now, we just go with who we have on.
Sure.
Yes, we would like to introduce then Rabbi Elman, who is a criminal justice activist and a member of the Faith Communities for Just Reentry.
So good morning, and I'm so proud to stand in solidarity with the people at Danbury, the federal correctional facility, and also at the Edgecombe and the Buffalo facilities, the state facilities, to advocate for better care, for actual real care for our incarcerated sisters and brothers. There is a interesting, the Jewish tradition, the biblical tradition that underlies Judaism doesn't have a lot to say about the criminal justice system. But interestingly, the first time we ever hear about anyone being incarcerated is the story of the butler and baker serving Pharaoh. And we're told that they both sin, the word that is usually translated as sin, against Pharaoh, and are therefore set into prison, where of course they meet Joseph. But the next time we hear that same word used is when the butler, who is later released, says to Pharaoh, I have sinned. I have forgotten Joseph, who helped me when I was in your prison and who asked me to present his case to you. And I have forgotten him. The biblical tradition makes it clear that the forgetting of people who are behind bars, the forgetting and the obliviousness to people who are incarcerated, who are not able to advocate for themselves, is equal to any crime that would put someone behind bars in the first place. For us to forget the people who are incarcerated, our sisters and brothers, and to ignore their needs, their very basic human needs. The snapshot that Tanya just gave us from Danbury is appalling. It is appalling that people should have to shout out the window to ask for help and then be responded to with laughter. These are unacceptable, beyond unacceptable circumstances. And it is our obligation, it is my obligation as a member of the clergy, as a rabbi, as a human being, to speak up for these people whose voices are not getting heard as loudly as they should be, and to demand that both the federal and the state systems provide the care for people behind bars that is needed at all times, and even more exceptionally so now with this pandemic that is targeting and is infecting people behind bars at a rate much higher than the rest of the population. We just learned that even in New York State, the number of people infected has risen by over 3,000 people since December of 2020. This is just not acceptable. And so I am standing here in support with the Fortune Society, with Alternatives for Incarceration, for all these other organizations that are here. Thank you all. I'm proud to be with you to support the demands that are being made. Thank you.
I'm now going to pass it off to Victor, who will do the presentation of our next panelists who are in Edgecombe.
So thank you so much, Rabbi, and thank you so much for everybody here that's joining us. And I'm getting ready to cue in our people at the Edgecombe Correctional Facility, and we're going to hear from them. And after that, then I have some particular statistics I would like to read, but I don't want to belabor this too long. So I'm going to cue in our folks at Edgecombe Correctional Facility. Andre Ward, you can take it away.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President for the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Today, we're here in front of Edgecombe Correctional Facility, a state prison that houses people, men and women, who are in prison. Today, we're out here rallying because we want to make known that the pandemic has claimed many lives in New York State prisons. And those lives that have been claimed are worthy of us being here today to acknowledge the fact that people have to be tested while in prison, they have to be given access to proper PPEs, and they must be prioritized to have access to the vaccine. Today, I'm joined with many leaders, many organizations, many coalitions. We even have Assemblywoman Dela Rosa, who's with us today, who's going to be speaking, because this is very important.
That's right.
The lives of people in prison are valuable. Human beings are valuable. And we're here today to demand that people be treated with dignity and people be treated with humanity and be given access to the right things to take care of their lives. We want to make sure that we're ending the practice of solitary confinement, that human beings are not quarantined by virtue of COVID-19, and that practice is likened to solitary confinement. So we want to end solitary confinement. We want to make sure people have access to the right resources to support them during this pandemic. So today I'm joined with all these leaders you see behind me. We want to make sure that people are valued. 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 And with that, I want to turn it over to our esteemed leader of this district, Assemblywoman Della Rosa.
Thank you.
Okay.
Come
Hello?
on.
You?
All right.
Okay, so I guess I'm on now.
Right, okay.
Do you
I
see
want
me?
to thank
I see you.
all the advocates that are here, the Fortune Society, RAP, Rise and Resist, and all of the people who have come out today. Because as we say, people have value. I visited Fishkill Correctional Facility last week, and one of the things that most impacted me was when people in prison say, we are being punished because we are sick. They were in solitary confinement, and they were forced to talk to us, to talk to medical staff through a small window. We are making a call today for compassionate leadership in New York State.
Yeah.
We are calling on our governor to use his power of clemency to release people who are most at risk of dying for COVID.
That's right.
Our communities have suffered far too long with this disease.
That's right.
It is no coincidence that the highest mortality rates are in Black and Brown communities. And it is also no coincidence that the highest number of incarcerated people are Black and Brown in this state.
That's right.
That is an injustice, a miscarriage of justice in our state. And we are here to say that it should not take lawsuits to compel our government to act in the best interest of its residents. People who are incarcerated are still New Yorkers.
That's right.
They're still people. They deserve the vaccine. They deserve access to quality care. But most of all, they should not be sentenced to death without a possibility of parole in New York State. It is far beyond time for us to not only make sure that our people who are in prison are treated fairly, like human beings that they are, but also that our laws keep up with the changing times. We must pass elder parole. We must pass fair and timely parole.
That's right. That's right.
And as I said before, we must ensure that every New Yorker, without prejudice to where you are, has access to vaccines.
That's right.
It's
That's
an
right.
honor to be here.
That's
We're going
right.
to continue to fight to make this a reality.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. We'd like to really thank Assemblywoman Della Rosa, who stands. I always say Dela Cruz, but she's Della Rosa, and she's our champion.
Yes.
To make sure that incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. And we thank Assemblywoman Della Rosa again for joining the fight and joining us in the ranks to make sure that people get access to the vaccination. They get the proper PPEs, and they also get tested like every other human being. At this time, I want to bring on one of the state organizers for the Center for Community Alternatives, Marvin Mayfield. Let's bring Marvin on.
Good morning. My name is Marvin Mayfield.
Incarcerated lives matter.
Good morning. My name is Marvin Mayfield. I'm a New York statewide organizer for Center for Community Alternatives. We organize formerly incarcerated people and families to achieve systemic change, that's fucking justice, and reduce reliance on incarceration through advocacy, direct service, and public policy. Check this out, y'all. On October 6th, 2006, right, the PETS Act was signed into law authorizing FEMA. Yep, FEMA, that same government agency that neglected Black people during Hurricane Katrina, to provide rescue, care, shelter, and essential needs for pets and service animals, and to provide pets and animals direct services themselves following a major disaster or emergency. I find it unconscionable that no such contingency exists for men and women who are held in cages in New York State and across the country. As we are dealing with yet another disaster, this same neglected population of human beings are getting sick and dying, and they need COVID vaccines just as urgently as anyone else. And even more so because they're in a congregate setting with no hope of social distancing. The state health department has said that we are currently in the midst of a comprehensive approach to vaccinating all eligible populations. Sounds good, right? And the governor is saying, well, right now we're focusing on the populations in phase 1A, which is supposed to include people who have cancer, kidney disease, pulmonary disease, asthma, developmental disabilities, heart conditions, high blood pressure, HIV, etc. So I submit to you, Governor Cuomo, that there are indeed men and women who are in New York State jails and prisons who qualify, who are in this phase 1 category. Their physical location should not diminish or does not diminish the severity of their conditions. I recently heard a statement from the Republican Senate Minority Leader who feels that inoculating prisoners is problematic and of questionable priority. Well, for those of you across the aisle in the Republican conference who find it problematic that incarcerated people be administered this vaccine, this is yet another example of when politics takes preference over people. Yet another example where the lives of incarcerated men and women in New York State is devalued. Over the past week, some of our dedicated legislators, both in the state Senate and Assembly, cast their personal safety aside and made surprise visits into several prisons and jails across New York State to assess the COVID situation. What they discovered is that there are people who are sick and immunocompromised and in no less dire need of vaccination than anyone else with these conditions. I am so grateful for these public servants who made surprise visits to see the true cost of COVID-19 and who was really paying the price. But I remain adamant about demanding that corrections staff follow the protocols, wear the masks. That's right. And that people behind the walls and razor wire are given the same access to vaccines as the rest of the population. We stand here today, united in our resolve to bring justice to the criminal legal system, to open the solitary confinement cages, to end the abuse of sentencing laws that cause death by incarceration, to release elderly people in prison, and to ensure a prompt and equitable distribution of the vaccine. My brothers and sisters who are in chains, who are in cages, we have not forgotten you. We will not rest until you have the rights and the health care that you deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. And thank you for that, Marvin. We appreciate that, your labor, as well as the labor of everybody that you see join with us today. It's important that human beings are treated with humanity and with dignity. And that's why we say incarcerated lives matter, because people in prison are still human beings. At this time, I want to bring up the New York City organizer for releasing aging people in prison, Mark Shervington. Let's bring him on. Yeah.
Incarcerated lives matter.
Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter.
A little closer. Oh yeah, I'm gonna break my neck. Good morning, everyone. Yet again, for all the wrong reasons, we find ourselves gathered here to demand human justice. We find ourselves here following the tragic death of yet another incarcerated person due to the coronavirus. It is insanity to have people incarcerated treated as less than human beings behind bars because of politics. This is why the RAP campaign, as well as joined by several of our colleagues and allies and several legislators, advocate for passage of the Elder Parole Bill and the Fair and Timely Parole Act as life-saving measures. The pandemic that led to the current situation is not just COVID. It was racism, mass incarceration that whipped through New York City with lightning speed in the early 80s. That led us to today's present crisis, where we have all of these people incarcerated for extended amounts of time for no apparent reason other than the zip code in which they were arrested. And some time ago, the election laws were changed so that people wouldn't be counted as residents where they were incarcerated upstate, which led to gerrymandering. They were counted as residents of the zip codes from which they came. They should also be treated like the people in the areas right here in New York City from which they came. We demand that they have access to the vaccines. We also demand passage of the Elder Parole Bill and the Fair and Timely Parole Act, all of which are life-saving measures. Thank you for your time.
Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Thank you for that, Mark. We're going to move right along. I want to bring up our sister who's in the fight to end solitary confinement. Let's bring on Natasha White to talk to us about ending solitary confinement.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Natasha White, and I am the community organizer for HALTSolitary campaign and a formerly incarcerated woman. It is imperative that everyone in corrections have access to the COVID vaccine immediately, including detainees and incarcerated individuals, as well as all staff. People's lives are on the line. I repeat, people's lives are on the line. Of the 52 New York State prisons, 36 are dealing with a COVID outbreak. Infection rates are well over 20% in at least 5 prisons and 48.3% in another prison. The amount of incarcerated people that tested positive for COVID has skyrocketed from 1,800 to 3,100 people. As a formerly incarcerated woman and a decent human being, I am outraged at the lack of compassion for detained and incarcerated individuals. COVID plus prison equals death. There's no social distancing, no personal protective equipment. Do they not deserve protection? Do incarcerated lives not matter? I know all too well the life and struggle of prison. Contracting deadly viruses should not be one of them. And the mere fact that it's not an automatic decision to protect the lives of people who are incarcerated and or work in corrections is horrible, selfish, and wrong. This is human life we are talking about. Instead, this state ignoring the urgency for vaccines and using solitary confinement as a way to contain contamination. Solitary is not quarantine. It is torture. As detrimental as solitary confinement is on a normal day, someone fighting COVID being confined is the most inhumane thing we as a people can do. Solitary confinement causes many different emotional and mental problems. Add COVID to the mix, and it's a lonely death sentence. On any given day, someone in solitary confinement attempts suicide. It is detrimental, and you want to use it for medical purposes. This is insanity. We will not have it. Halt solitary now. Make vaccines accessible for incarcerated people now. You know why? Because incarcerated lives matter.
Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. And we're going to bring up somebody from the Justice Women's Task Force and a little piece of light. Want to come on up here and say a couple of words, and the other person from the Justice Women's Task Force, come on up here and share the importance around women giving access to PPE, giving access to vaccination, giving access to testing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm here representing A Little Piece of Life. We are an organization formed by Donna Hilton. We are a safe space for women and girls who have been traumatized by these oppressive systems. We are here to demand the release of our brothers and sisters. We have people in correctional facilities that have technical violations. And by them being in correctional facilities, they are now sentenced to death for missing a curfew. We are all human. All lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. A Little Piece of Light is dedicated to fighting for the release of our brothers and our sisters behind bars. We want proper PPE. We want release. We want people to know that we're human. Incarcerated lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have, thank you very much. We have somebody from the Justice Women Task Force who's also here to share a couple of words, and then we're going to turn it over back to our virtual rally.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Before I begin really quick, I just want to dedicate what I'm saying to a friend of mine who did 10 or more of his 17-year bid in solitary confinement, and he lost his battle with solitary confinement on Christmas Day, Michael Alec. Which brings me to why we're here today, because behind these bars and gates of this and almost 30 other prisons in New York, women, men, and non-binary human beings are being murdered by a torturous and unnecessary solitary confinement system by corruption officers intent on exacting unnecessary and vile physical, sexual, and medical abuse on people, and on so-called medical professionals who swore to do no harm, who are doing exactly the opposite of that. Medical needs are not being met. There's a pandemic going on that has killed over 400,000 people worldwide and is killing incarcerated people at an even faster rate. My sisters and brothers need vaccines, treatments, and the appropriate gear and PPE, such as masks and real cleaning supplies, not just germicide and that ridiculous pink stuff. There must be a mass release, especially of the elderly and immunocompromised, as well as any pregnant and new mothers that may still be incarcerated. We demand that Governor Cuomo issue an executive order that all incarcerated people be vaccinated yesterday. And finally, we demand that all solitary confinement units, AKA SHU, be closed immediately.
Shut it down!
For they are not only torturous and unnecessary, but they serve as little concentrated crockpots for COVID-19. We don't need any more deaths, not from COVID or any other illness, and not from solitary confinement. We urge you to act now. And when I see my friend Michael on the other side one day, I hope to be able to greet him and tell him that his nor any other DOC victim did not die in vain. Thank you.
Yes. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. And we like to thank all of the organizations for coming out. Rise and Resist, Vocal is out here. All of the organizations who supported this, Halt Solitary Confinement, RAP, Center for Community Alternatives, and we're coming back. So don't you go anywhere, because incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. Incarcerated lives matter. And we'll turn it back. And we'll turn it back to those who are on the virtual rally. Rebecca and Victor.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being there. Thank you for all that have spoke with such passion and compassion. And it just goes to show you just how important that we keep this upfront, close, and personal to those who are responsible for the policies that affect the lives of those that are incarcerated. And surely incarcerated lives matter. So just a quick, before I turn it over to my next speaker, you heard a few numbers that we're talking about, and it's just shameful and reprehensible that we talk about the amount of people that's in our prisons and jails across the states. In New York State, we have over 37,000 some odd incarcerated people. And since COVID has begun, the numbers of people that have been infected, of people, those that are incarcerated, is totally, totally, totally unacceptable because of the fact that they have been denied appropriate care, not given the proper PPEs, not given the proper sanitary conditions with which they deserve because they are human beings. When we're talking about people who have died from COVID infections, which in the New York State prison system has been 31, and of particular disturbing information, when we have Fishkill Correctional Facility, which leads the amount of deaths in all of the state correctional facilities, where there were 6. Sing Sing Correctional Facility, which had a total of 4 deaths, came in second. So when you're talking about incarcerated lives matter, and we're talking about the things that people are not getting, and when you're talking about what's going on, not only out here in our communities, but just think about what's going on in the communities of those incarcerated. So the people that are incarcerated are 3 times more likely to be infected by COVID because of their lack of being able to social distance, number one, because of the lack of giving appropriate PPEs. So when you're talking about the possibility of people being infected, you're talking about this most vulnerable population. So we're saying is that we need to make sure, while you're talking about vaccinating this public, we need to make sure that our incarcerated population also has access to this vaccination and also is given vaccination. I happen to be looking at the news report this morning. This little ticker tape thing came across the bottom of the screen. And it said that Governor Cuomo has said that now people in state facilities will be given vaccinated. I haven't seen anything anywhere that substantiates this here, because Governor Cuomo speaks out of both sides of his mouth. When and where this is supposed to be happening has not been said. Just as when COVID first started, they had no particular plan to protect this population of those that are incarcerated, except their answer was to stop all visits and stop all programs. That didn't do anything, because when you look at what has happened, the pandemic has broken out. It broken out 3 times as worse in our facilities across the different states. So when you're talking about you're going to vaccinate this population, we want to know when this is going to happen and what is the exact plan for making sure that all incarcerated people are vaccinated, not only in the state, but also in local and county jail. So we're saying incarcerated lives matter. We saying we are demanding that these people be treated humanely and fairly. We're saying that they deserve the same treatment that people in our communities deserve. So with that said, I'm going to bring up our first virtual speaker, someone that you all probably know, probably heard before. I know it's for surely someone that I've heard speaking before. A member of the New York City Board of Corrections. We're going to bring Dr. Robert Cohen, who will please say a few words to our audience. Dr. Cohen, you now have the mic. Dr. Cohen, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, thank
so
you,
much.
Victor, and thanks to the organizers of this important panel. I speak as a physician and administrator of jail and prison health services, and as a monitor for health services at city and state levels. And I speak as a very concerned citizen who is stupefied and terrified at the cavalier and twisted logic of our mayor and governor. There is not enough vaccine for everyone who needs it, but there are many reasons to believe that the currently available vaccines are effective and that mass vaccination will be one of the crucial elements that enables us to return to a normal life. But what is a normal life in Adirondack Prison? What is a normal life in Greenhaven Correctional Institution? What is a normal life? The population in the city jails of New York has returned to the same population it was last February. That brief shining moment when our elected officials, the mayor, the attorneys, the judge, and the judges, all elected and state paroled, all recognized that if they collectively reduced the population inside the jails, they could save lives. Supported by the defense bar, the Departments of Correction, Correctional Health Services, and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, everyone worked together. The population decreased 30% Lives were lost, but many lives were saved. The population dropped 1,500 to 3,800. We recognized then, and we recognize now, that the decarceration is the most critical component of the efforts to save lives of those locked up in prisons and jails. Inside, there is no protection. New York City intentionally overcrowds dormitories, making it impossible to maintain social distance. Beds are head to toe, 3 feet apart at the sides, and there is no possibility of social distancing when they use by up to 50 people at a time. Overcrowding is worse in other jurisdictions. That is the reason the rate of infections in prisons is 4 times the rate of the general population, and the death rate is 3 times as high. Everyone should wear masks in prison. This is a major cultural and political issue in the United States. It must be addressed through health education and the leadership of all of the communities who work and live in jails and prisons. Our memory is that short. The population in the jails has increased greater than it was before the pandemic. I would suggest that the mayor has backed down. MOCJ, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, for years led by Liz Glazer, has receded from public view when she resigned her office last spring. After leading the decarceration efforts from the beginning of the de Blasio mayoralty, now the criminal system policy is led by Commander Shea and the New York City Police Department. Their public position is that decarceration successes of the past several years caused crime, and their response is to fill the jails. Now, we have a vaccine, but there's not enough for everyone. But still, 100,000 doses a day were given out in New York State last week. The scope of the COVID epidemic in outbreak in the jails and prisons is stunning and increasing. Jails and prisons in New York do not have the infrastructure to provide health care adequately for people with COVID-19 infection. This is the reason why decarceration is the most effective way of dealing with the pandemic. Outbreaks in the jails and prisons put the greater community at risk. The only way the virus gets in is from the staff, and they come in and out daily. Civilian and correctional security staff should be tested for COVID infection twice weekly in order to protect everyone. Finally, and essentially, there is something extraordinarily cruel in Governor Cuomo's approach to vaccination of prisoners. He recognizes that congregate facilities pose an extremely elevated risk of infection, and the appropriate response is to prioritize vaccination for all people who live in these facilities. People who live and work in shelters are prioritized to receive vaccine. People who live and work in congregate medical and homeless and congregate mental health facilities are prioritized to receive this vaccine. But only people who work in jails and prisons are prioritized to receive the vaccine, but people who live there are not. The mayor and the governor, finally forced to provide some treatment for incarcerated people in New York, now claim that they are providing vaccine access to 500 medically vulnerable people living in the jails. Last spring, there were 1,500 medically vulnerable people released in New York City. 1,500, and now they say there are 500 medically vulnerable. The governor says he will provide vaccine to people over 65. His deliberate failure to recognize the risk of infection and death is so much higher in his prisons. And critically, he fails to recognize the enormous policy failure of not releasing older people living and dying in prison, his prisons. This bad public health policy, it's justified by a perverted racist logic of fairness. The mayor and the governor argue they are applying the same rules to those providing vaccine to over 65, but this logic is racist and irrational. I don't have to explain this logical travesty to you. People locked inside cannot protect themselves from COVID-19 infection from contact with staff. Spread inside the jails is extremely rapid. Comparison with open institutions where people can enter and leave each day is illogical, and as a consequence, many people will die. I'm honored to join you today. Incarcerated lives matter. All people living inside need to be vaccinated urgently. Incarceration should be the priority concern for the safety of all. And elders in our prison should receive vaccination immediately and then be released. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your support and thank you for the information that you have imparted. And I just want to say this before I bring up the next person and hearing you speak. I remember when the pandemic first hit, they had no plan in place for the incarcerated population, none whatsoever. Their only answer was to stop visits and stop communication. Well, if their plan was originally in their mind to stop the spread of COVID, and you have a captive population of people that were going nowhere from the beginning, and your only answer was to stop visits, which is community and familiar contact, which is a good for the spirit and for the soul, then who brung it in? Who brung it into the facilities when you had people that were just sitting there like fish in a barrel, and you had staff and correctional officers that were coming in and out, and you had a captive population of people that weren't going anywhere? Who brung it in? Who was responsible for the facilities being infected with COVID if they were not going anywhere and you stopped the visits?
Yes.
Inquiring minds would like to know. Just something to think about. So I'll turn it over to my next speaker, Carl Stubbs, who is an organizer with Vocal. Keep that in mind, people, when we think about people that are in our prisons and jails and how vulnerable they are to this COVID virus in terms of comparing to the communities. Carl, can you please come to the mic?
How you doing, everybody? What I feel about the COVID right now is that, I've been in Edgecombe. I did time in Edgecombe back in the 90s, and it's so crowded, you can't move around in there. So I know how to feel when people are on top of each other, I don't think anything right now is to get rid of Promo. He's no different from what Trump is doing, okay? He should be impeached, okay? And it's the people's fault that got him there. We always believe in him, but he turned his backs on us, okay? It's bad to be in prison. And when you cannot even cope with yourself, it's bad to be in prison. When you cannot even think for yourself, I know how I feel. Feeling is just being away from there. And all those prison does is make you institutional wise, okay? It makes you more worse than when you come home, you take it out on the people that you don't want to take it out on. So I think that what we need to do right now is trying to get rid of Cuomo, because he's not going to change. He's not going to change. So the best, we got to vote him out. Some way, we got to vote him out. Thank you. I'm tired of speaking about it.
Thank you so much, Carl, for sharing that thought. And like you say, we vote them in, we vote them out. And that's just why it's so important for, especially those that are directly or formerly or collaterally impacted by the criminal injustice system, because the policies and laws that we have that we are now faced with is a result of people voting people in and voting people out. And the decisions that are made to which policies and which laws that we are under is through a political process. So that's why it's so important for us to be civically engaged, to be informed, and to become fully familiar with what laws and policies that affects our lives, those of them that are in as well as those of them that are out. So I strongly urge my fellow comrades, those of us that are formerly incarcerated, people coming home who now have the right to vote under Executive Law 181, which is good, but of course, we need something a little bit more. We're definitely pushing that with Senate Bill 830 will give people the right to vote before they come out. And once they are released to the community, don't have to wait for the 30 days for the conditional pardon from Executive Order 181. They should come out with the right to vote. So just a little, FYI, register to vote if you can vote. and not only register, but you should actually go and vote. You should make a difference. You should take a hand in your life as it affects you in the community, because the only way we can change this is if we are personally engaged and involved. It's up to us to change this miserable system, to get the people out who do not represent our interests and put people in who will make a more fair and just system. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to my co-moderator, Rebecca, and let her navigate you through the next portion of our journey. Rebecca?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Victor. Am I still muted? No. And so, yes, just to and then I'm going to pass it over to our fantastic folks in Buffalo, you know, to add to some of what Victor is saying. The supposed vaccination that is going to start in New York State prisons, again, that was brought only after months and months of, you know, of attempts to change the system by a lawsuit that claimed that it violated the Equal Protection Clause of our Constitution to not provide incarcerated individuals with the vaccine while everybody else in congregate settings was getting it. And I think we have to push hard on that, because I think that is an obvious violation of our Constitution, and it is something that we need to continue to fight for. And as I like to say, rallies plus lawsuits are the things that bring change. That is often what we get. And so, and in Danbury, it was not only an equal protection violation, it was also a Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment violation that our federal government was doing in Danbury. And, you know, Danbury, you know, as you heard from our fantastic speaker, the conditions there could still be considered cruel and unusual punishment. So this is what we got to do, is we got to keep these issues all in mind as we start to fight this issue. I'm now going to turn it over to our folks in Buffalo, and I'm going to start, and they are currently at the Greater Royal Worship Center in Buffalo. And I am going to start with Evan Masula. And Evan is an organizer who is in Buffalo. Oh no, I'm sorry. I apologize. I meant to turn that over to Daryl Scott. I apologize.
That's okay. It's all right. We still rolling. The train is still moving forward.
Yeah.
Yes,
all right, Daryl. If we can hear from Daryl, that would be great.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Daryl
we got
Scott.
you, Daryl. Go right ahead.
Okay. Daryl Scott, formerly incarcerated and also a survivor of solitary confinement. Now, in the background, if you can see and you can hear, this is a replica cell. We're having a little bit of video problem, but I want you to hear. This is the normal sound of solitary confinement. It's atrocious, it's wrong, and it's detrimental. But now I submit to you, with the inception of the COVID, this is what you hear now, because the people there can't breathe. They're sick. They're using this solitary confinement as torture and as a death sentence. This is what you probably hear. I don't know. But this is what I submit to you. This is what you probably hear now in the SHU 200s. Now, I have a brother here that was actually incarcerated not too long ago on a parole violation. So he's gonna attest, he's gonna give you testimony of what actually happened. I don't know if he was in the box or not, but he was definitely incarcerated. This is Injera. So Steve, I'm gonna turn it over to Steve right now.
Okay, hello. I'm in Buffalo, but I'm not at the church, and I'm going to ask questions of Injera so we can hear his account of what happened to him in the Erie County facilities. So Injera, while you were in the Erie County Holding Center and the correctional facilities, you were put in a unit that was specially for people having to do with COVID, right?
Yes, sir.
And so, at what point, why were you put there?
It was alleged that I came in contact with someone possibly infected with COVID in the law library.
Okay, so it was okay. And what were the conditions like in that unit?
Atrocious. They were very, very, very bad.
Were you? Was it like? Was it solitary confinement?
It might as well have been. We came out of our cell for 15 minutes a day, sir. And in that time, you had to get in the shower, call your loved ones, and try to make something to eat. It was a very bad ordeal.
And so so you didn't get out of cell to talk to other people or to have meals or anything?
Initially, when it first started, you were out they were cross-contaminating. They were letting infected guys stay around other guys who haven't been tested, be around everyone. But then they tried to implement a social distancing policy 2 weeks after, and they had guys in their cells, and you only got 15 minutes out. You couldn't talk to anyone, you couldn't see anyone, you couldn't.
Edgecombe, we're signing out at Edgecombe. Signing out, everybody.
Okay. Now, what kind of medical care did they provide for you there in testing?
They provided no medical care, absolutely none. They came around, and as throughout the time period, one of the nurse who was administering the test tested positive for COVID. I don't really know exactly what was going on, but it was terrible medical conditions. It was terrible medical, being passed, being treated. We weren't being treated with anything. We weren't being given any notes. We didn't know anything. We were just thrown in the cell and told, this is all well. We wait until the head medical professional, until he lets us know. Until then, we were just sitting. There was no medical care being administered whatsoever.
And did these terrible conditions they put you under and all these restrictions, did it actually manage to stop COVID from spreading?
No, sir. COVID still spread it rapidly because there was no proper form of disinfecting or anything of that nature. The staff or no one knew how to properly disinfect the phones or the microwave or any of those things that every individual, when they come out for their 15 minutes, uses, the mop, the broom. So it was still being transmitted, and 18 people ended up testing positive through the time I was there.
Out of how many in the unit?
35.
Okay, so over half.
Yeah, it was too many people for one.
Yeah.
Initially, I was going to the law library, and I myself were putting in documents, letters to Governor Cuomo and stuff of that nature. And out of nowhere, they said I was around someone that tested positive. I personally think it was just, an ordeal to get me away from what was going on. It was a pure tactical advantage they were using to prevent stuff from being sent from guys incarcerated on behalf of guys incarcerated and stuff of that nature. So they threw us in quarantine, what they call with quarantine. I was there 30 days. Quarantine was only 14 days prior to my release.
Okay, so yeah, so instead of supposed quarantine unit, but they put in jail there for 30 days. They still managed to get more than half of the people infected in the unit. They imposed solitary confinement that's even worse than the usual where you get an hour out a day, but only 15 minutes out a day. All of this and no treatment, nothing. I mean, this is characteristic. I mean, this is an example of something that's happening all around the state and county jails and in state prisons, that people are using solitary, claiming that it's quarantine or medical isolation or treatment. And I mean, we even hear sheriffs saying that the safest place for people is in jail. I mean, it makes one's blood curdle. And it's especially destructive in jails, because in jails, people are going in and out much faster than in state prisons. There are people who are being brought in who've been newly arrested every day. There are people who reach a point where they have to be released every day. They can't be closed down the way that the state prisons are. The state prisons are still a correctional staff coming in every day. And that's true in the jails too. But in the jails, the incarcerated people go in and out every day too. So it's an extraordinary thing. And then to make it worse, the population of incarcerated people in county jails is an extraordinarily unhealthy one. We followed 37 people that were held during the in the county jails facilities in Erie County. And of the people that we were able to determine their medical situation, 2/3 had at least one comorbidity that put them at high risk of death if they were infected. And that's because these were people who were on parole, and so they'd been in prison for many years, and prisons destroy people's health on a systematic basis all the time. You wanted to add something, Indira, about that?
Upon being arrested initially, I myself spoke to a lot of individuals just so I can know exactly what was transpiring through their process. They were being brought into Erie County Holding Center. They were kept there 3 days, and they were shipped right out to Erie County Correctional Facility. No quarantine, no mask, no tests. They were coming fresh off the streets and brought directly into a unit along with guys who've been there for months without being tested. We haven't been tested, they haven't been tested. So they don't know if anyone was infected with the virus. They just brought them right into the unit.
Okay, so now if Erie County is bad, then think of how much worse Governor Cuomo is. The sheriff of Erie County, who is not exactly a friend of incarcerated people, he wrote to the state requesting vaccine for the incarcerated population as well as for the staff. But the state hasn't given any vaccine to the Erie County facilities, despite this request from the sheriff. So that's on the state, not on the county, which the jail can't act on its own. It can't allocate vaccine, I think, on its own authority. That has to come from the state. And so Cuomo wasn't doing that. And then if you want to go from really bad, which is Cuomo, to even worse, we go to docs. Last March, as the shutdown started, Cuomo instructed docs to release people who were being held in county jails pending hearings on allegations of minor technical parole violations. Now, these are people who are held under the authority of docs, not of local judges and DAs. And docs was supposed to release them. The only exception was supposed to be people who were threats to public safety. And that would be a very small number of cases because the violations that people were accused of were non-violent, trivial actions. And these were people who were living in the community on parole already successfully. But when I did a detailed quantitative study of this statewide, and what I found was that only 38% of the people held in jails for technicals were released. In Erie County, it was only 28%. Of the 37 people we followed, only two of them, that's 5%, had something that might raise a public safety flag in their record in what they've done recently. So it's clear that docs didn't do anything like good faith what Cuomo had instructed. Even what Cuomo had instructed. They left over 1,000 people who should have been released sitting in county jails, subject to getting sick and then dying because of how poor the health of many of these incarcerated people were. And in fact, we know that at least a few of the people incarcerated on parole violations did die within county jails, and probably it's more than a few. We just don't have the figures on that. So the pandemic has tested us as individuals, and it's tested our institution. And docs, and especially its parole arm, they've really flunked the test. They've shown themselves incapable of rationality, incapable of compassion, an agency that is a rogue institution that is destructive of human life at a level that if it were a parent taking care of a child or a person supervising a congregate facility taking care of the people living there would be called criminal negligence. So this is the agency that we have and that needs to be destroyed, frankly, and replaced with something completely different as soon as possible, because it has no regard whatsoever for incarcerated lives, not the slightest regard for that. Some of the individual corrections officers and some of the individual parole officers, I'm sure, do. But as an institution, it is totally incapable of any regard for incarcerated lives. Now, the complete report, which has figures on every county in the state and so forth, I'm going to put a link to it in the chat so that any of you who want to read it. It was published by the Partnership for the Public Good, which is a think tank here in Buffalo. So you can see the gory details on the bad faith implementation of Cuomo's instructions about letting people out during the pandemic. So I'll turn things back now for the rest of our program. Do you want Indira and Daryl, do you want to say anything more before we leave Buffalo?
Indira Wilson, not. Yeah. No, I'm just going to say about the replica cell. Someone did in a chat, they asked about the replica cell. If I'm not mistaken, a retired police officer came up with the concept of building this replica cell. So we built one initially, then the guy from Albany, Steve, what's his name? The engineer that also has a son.
Doug Van Zandt, whose
Doug
son
Van
died.
Zandt. Doug Van Zandt.
Right, Doug, right. And so he came up with a slimmed down model, and this is what you see now. This is much more mobile than our initial one. And so we want to give kudos to him and his engineering skills that made this thing slimline, and we able to move this thing like within like a half an hour to 45 minutes versus an hour and a half to 2 hours on the old one. And so this is Daryl Scott signing out from Buffalo. And Incarcerate Lives Matter. Peace.
Thank you all. So Victor, you want to take it away now?
Victor, I can also jump in. Just that
Steve?
Yeah, it's okay. We're gonna go now to our final. I believe it is our final two panelists, Evan Mazzullo, who is from the New York Correctional Association.
Thank you so much. I'm a data scientist at the New York Correctional Association, and we are empowered under state law to monitor and inspect New York State prisons. And there are some really important numbers that I want to share with you. Obviously, the stories we've heard today are incredible, but sometimes numbers can help move this story along, and I'd like to share them with you. As of February 4th, New York State positivity was 4.31%. Positivity across the prison system for the same day was 11.29. Prison positivity is 2.6 times greater than New York State positivity. There's been one additional death just since January 28th, the end of last month, or the last day that docs reported last month. COVID-19 infections this month, just for February, are in 61.5% of the prisons, 32 out of 52. On February 4th, prison testing is only 1.6 times the proportional New York State testing, even though system positivity is 2.6 times that of New York State. The most recent prison that we were at in December was Greenhaven. We surveyed 156 people out of the 1,501 in general population and 111 in ICP. 88.3% of incarcerated individuals said they had not received enough information on how to take care of their masks. 71.6% said that docs had not provided enough information so that they could protect themselves for COVID. 65.6% said they were not satisfied with docs' response to COVID. and 61.7% said they were not able to maintain social distances during yard runs and program callouts. 57.1% continue to report that docs do not wear masks over their nose and mouth. Frequent complaints when we gave people a chance to respond freely were that there were lack of cleaning supplies and that there was massive roach infestation. Correctional Association recommends that docs implement and sustain a practice of comprehensive testing in order to develop accurate baseline understanding of rates of positivity in New York prisons. Just in the top 5 prisons, Franklin, we got 67.4% positivity. In Great Meadow, 25.8% positivity with 32 infections. Bear Hill, 29 positive infections. And I'm just talking about since January 28th. 37.7% positivity. Wyoming, 29 infections since January 28th, and 45.3% positivity. Clinton, 16 infections, 37.2% positivity. And again, this is just since January 28th. Kenny recommends that docs provide additional detail about tests and the COVID-19 section of its website, including differentiating between the number of tests administered and the number of individuals tested, listing the test results by date, including cumulative and point in time measures, listing demographic data for incarcerated individuals infected with COVID-19. We don't even know how the racial disparities of what's going on, and breaking out employee infection data by facility. Finally, Kaney recommends that docs provide incarcerated people with written confirmation of their COVID test results. And we urge New York to adopt the CDC's guideline and give all 33,000 incarcerated people across the state simultaneous access to the vaccine. Incarcerated people should be designated as a priority population for all the reasons mentioned here before. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everybody's incredible work trying to make sure that incarcerated lives really do matter in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan. And now, before our demands, we have our last speaker, who is Patricia Hernandez, who is representing the COVID Justice Coalition.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been incredible to hear from all you leaders in the field. In my opinion, we cannot have a discussion on decarceration without talking about housing and the need for ongoing development and investment in affordable and supportive housing for our communities. As New York continues to battle COVID, it is critical that we protect those who are experiencing homelessness, people with complex medical and behavioral health needs, and people of color. This especially includes people who are incarcerated in New York jails and prisons. As all have said in this rally, we need to ensure that COVID-19 safety measures, such as having PPE, social distancing, increased testing, and access to vaccinations are available to those inside of jails and prisons. And for those who are eligible, and even those who are not eligible but should be released into the community to minimize the further spread of COVID and risk of death. People incarcerated have the right to protect their health, just like every one of us. Incarcerated New Yorkers should and need to be released, but not to the streets or to congregate settings, but into stable, safe, permanent housing. We knew before COVID, and COVID confirmed that housing is healthcare. Housing protects individuals and communities. People need safe and stable homes if they need to quarantine or shelter in place as a result of spikes in infection. Solitary confinement is not a place to quarantine for anyone. We must stay the course and continue to ensure New York is a national leader in affordable and supportive housing. We need to direct resources to communities of color that suffer from the impacts of harmful policies related to housing, criminal justice, and more. Let's start shifting funds away from these crisis systems and direct it towards community who truly need affordable housing. Please support Incarcerated Lives and help us in protecting New Yorkers coming home by increasing the development and service funding for true affordable supportive housing. Housing is health, and incarcerated lives matter. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you so much. So those are our panelists for today. And now Victor and I would like to read to you what we think are our, the most crucial demands, the demands that you need to start calling your legislators about, tweeting about, writing, potentially organizing meetings about. These are the demands that are most crucial for the continuance of, for the discontinuance rather, of, the rapid spread of COVID-19 within our prisons and the lack of respect for incarcerated lives. And I think Victor was going to start with our first demand.
Yes, thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you for all of the speakers, and definitely thank you for all you who attended this virtual online rally. We definitely appreciate your presence, your voices, your concerns, and your prayers. And this is just why, it's just so important that we, as fellow human beings, community members, family members of those incarcerated, advocates, and even legislators, what I'm saying, that it is just so important that we raise our voices and we don't be silent about this horrific conditions that is going on in our prisons and jails, and this immoral circumstances that are happening to other human beings, because these very same human beings that are in our prisons and jails right now are going to be the same human beings that eventually turn to our community. And how do we want them to come back? Do we want them to come back better? Do we want them to come back worse? Well, if correction is supposed to be about correction, then opportunities for correction should happen, restorativeness, second chances should happen. And I say that, incarcerated lives matter, all lives matter, but we can't leave anybody behind, because at the end of the day, when we look at the broad spectrum of things, it's about humanity. It's about caring about the fellow human being. And just think at that one day that we are all here on this borrowed time in our lives, that there's going to day come that we're going to have to answer for the deeds that we have done. We're going to answer for how we treated another human being. We're going to answer to how we treated humanity. So think about it as an individual moral responsibility that we have to look out and take care of other human beings and to make sure that they are well and they are okay. So with that said, what I'm saying, thank you each and every one of you who joined us today. This is only the beginning. Call your legislators, go to your legislator's office, push them to do the right thing by those of the less fortunate of our population. And with that, I'll begin. So one of the first lists of our demands, we demand for quality medical treatment and services for incarcerated people during COVID-19 and beyond. Number two, we demand the full use of the authority to release people on home confinement with priority consideration for medically vulnerable individuals. Number three, we demand effective and efficient access to testing. Rebecca?
Yes, thank you, Victor. Number four, and I'm going to put these in the chat afterwards if that would be helpful for people to be able to sort of tweet this stuff out. Number four, demand the following of CDC protocols on PPE distribution. Shouldn't be that hard. The rest of us are trying our best to do that, but that is not happening within prisons. Number five, demand all correction staff wear masks and are educated on the use of PPE. So connected to the one before. Number six, demand immediate end of using solitary confinement or other punitive or inappropriate settings for medical quarantine or isolation. And of course, we've heard of that a great deal today, and of the suffering that's involved. And the last one, demand all incarcerated people. So not just people 65 and over, because we're talking about everybody being in a congregate, confined environment. Demand all incarcerated people have immediate access to the vaccine, as well as education and information about the vaccine. So I'm gonna list these in the post, in the chat. If anyone would like to be able to tweet these out, it would be of great, help for us and for this beginning campaign to start to take this seriously. So with that, Yeah, I think those are our speakers for today. Thank you for staying a little extra time. We had a lot to say and in many different places, but that shows how this is a widespread throughout New York kind of issue, and Connecticut as well. So yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care.